The photo looked so incredibly innocent when Brienne first posted it to her social media, but it would turn out to be anything but. When police saw the picture, it did not take long before they took action and came down hard on Brienne's husband, James. And when Brienne figured out what could be seen in the picture, she immediately understood why James had to be arrested. James was trying anything to claim he was innocent, but the police were not buying it, and even his loving wife Brienne had started to get a lot of doubts about James. She could feel that he was holding something back, but she was praying that it wasn't what the police were suspecting him of. The police took James away, and the next time Brienne saw him, he was standing trial. It still all felt so surreal for her. But when the picture was shown for the first time on that day, it all became more real for her in an instant. The picture that Brienne had posted would end up being shown a lot in court, and the more Brienne looked at it, the more stupid she felt for not seeing it sooner. But what could be seen in this picture? Why did James have to be arrested for it, and would Brienne's family make it through this? By this point, Brienne must have taken about 1 million pictures of her family. This is why it made sense that a couple of recent ones did not grasp her attention as much as they probably should have. But luckily, the police knew exactly what they were looking at when the picture was presented to them. Even though Brienne had no idea about what was going on with this picture, she was the one who put it into the world. She always made a weekly Instagram post showing what her family had been up to in the past week, and this innocent-looking family picture was among her most recent posts. Brienne had actually been doing this for quite a while, and had built up a decent-sized following over the years. She had always wanted to be some sort of online influencer, and even though she was not there yet, she was well on her way. But something changed when she uploaded this one picture. Brienne quickly realized that the post was getting a lot more traction than normal. She could not really react or check it out at the time as she was at work, but she could see her phone nearly continuously give notifications from Instagram. She had never seen this before. She was really curious to check them out during her break, as she wanted to know what people liked so much about her post. But before she got the chance, suddenly, all the notifications disappeared from her screen. Now, Brienne could not wait until her break to figure out what had happened. She came up with the excuse to go to the bathroom so she could check her phone there. To her surprise, she saw that the post, which caused all the interaction, was gone. But not only that, her whole Instagram page seemed to be suspended until further notice. Brienne was baffled. She knew that something like this could happen when a content creator violated the terms and services of Instagram. But she was sure that this was not the case with her latest post, or any of the posts she had made on this channel. Brienne was so sure about it because this had actually happened to her before, but that was when she was making a very different style of content. She was young and naive at the time, and the desire to be an influencer was much stronger back then than it was now. Brienne had tried her very best to delete these old pictures from the internet and make sure they would never be found again. But every now and then, one of them still managed to make its way back onto the World Wide Web. Because once something is on the internet, it stays there forever. Brienne had left that life far behind her at this point, and this family Instagram channel was supposed to be a fresh start. But in her mind, her past had seemingly come back to bite her, as all the traction she was getting probably alerted Instagram to her previous work. But this was actually not the case at all. Brienne still had no idea that the ban had nothing to do with what she posted online when she was younger, and everything with the recent picture that was seemingly going viral. It had not even been Instagram that wanted to take to account offline. It had been a request from local law enforcement. Brienne had already sent multiple messages to Instagram during her break asking for clarification or help, but so far, she had gotten no response. After her shift, she drove home unsure of what to do, but the Instagram ban would soon be the furthest thing from her mind. She wanted to discuss what to do next with her husband and the father of her children, James. He was supposed to be home all day, but when she arrived at their house, his car was not there. But there were a lot of other cars, and those made Brienne's heart sink. There were 3 police cars parked in front of her house, and the front door was wide open. Police officers were standing in front of the house and talking. Brienne stopped the car a bit away from her house, unsure of what to do. What the hell was even going on? Before Brienne could make up her mind about what she was going to do next, someone walked up to her car. It was her neighbor. She had probably recognized the vehicle. She opened the door and quickly got into the passenger seat. The woman looked pale, as if she had seen a ghost. Brienne was a bit stunned by her neighbor's action, but the woman explained that she wanted to inform her of what she had seen earlier that day, before she was forced to talk to the police officers who were clearly waiting for her. Brienne listened with bated breath. She had seen James flee out of the back door of the house even before the police cars were in sight. He had clearly known that they had to be coming for him. Because of his behavior, the neighbor thought that James had done something that he may be arrested for. Soon after the police officers arrived, they started yelling that the door needed to be opened up and that, if nobody opened it, they would break it down. Eventually, one of Brienne's children opened up, probably scared as could be. But the neighbor did not see this, as she had already gone back into her house again. Brienne had 1,000 questions based on this conversation. She wanted to be furious at the police for putting her children through that. She wanted to know where they were, and she needed to talk to James to get his explanation for all this. But she did not get the chance for any of this. She had been sitting in the car with her neighbor for a little while now, and police officers had spotted the vehicle. And just after the neighbor had finished her story, an officer tapped on the window and asked Brienne to come out. They had a lot of questions for her. The poor mother seemed to be at a loss for words from the situation, but the officers did not seem to really care. They recognized her and immediately started repeatedly asking her where her husband James was. Just like her neighbor had told her, he was clearly not at home, but where else could he be? Suddenly, her motherly instinct kicked in, and instead of answering the officers' questions, she demanded to know where her children were. The officers told her that they had brought them to their grandmother's, Brienne's mother, house, as she only lived 10 minutes away, and they were able to confirm the address. Now, Brienne admitted that she had no idea where he was, and she asked the officers why they were even looking for him in the first place. The officers were apparently not allowed to share any details on the case, but this did not sit well with Brienne. The officers wanted her to call her husband and ask him to turn himself in, but Brienne refused. She was not going to work with the officers if she was not told what was going on, and if they could not tell her, then she wanted a lawyer first. The police looked angry, but there was nothing they could do about her demand. They agreed that Brienne would need to show up at the police station tomorrow morning with a lawyer, and if she did not have one, they would provide one for her. Failure to show up would result in a warrant for her arrest. It was clear that these officers were serious, and this only made Brienne more curious and worried about what the hell was going on with her husband. She needed to get to her children first, but trying to get hold of James again for an explanation was not far behind on her to-do list. The police actually had a warrant to search the house, so Brienne could not make them go away or stop them from turning the place upside down. So she quickly got back in her car again and drove off to her mother's house. She had to make sure her kids were okay. But during the entire ride, she was focused on one thing. Brienne was repeatedly trying to call James. She had called his number 5, 10, even 20 times by the time she arrived at her mother's house. But that man was simply not picking up. It was even worse than that. He declined her call every time, even after having the phone ring only once. Brienne was absolutely furious. How could he ignore her like that in this kind of situation? But there was nothing she could do right now, and she needed to put up a brave face for her children. Her number one priority was making sure they were okay and stayed okay. Luckily, her little ones seemed to be doing all right. They told her that they had been scared by the police banging on the door and demanding to be let in. But once they had opened up the door, the officers were really nice, calm, and trying to comfort them. The officers had apologized for scaring them, and the ones that had brought them to Grandma's house were actually still there. They wanted to make sure that they were ready in case James showed up at the house or made a call. Brienne hoped that they could give her some more clarification, but she did not even get the time to ask. The conversation was suddenly interrupted by the ringing of Brienne's phone. She looked at the screen and froze when she saw that it was James's number. The officers knew exactly what was happening by her facial impression and told her to pick up and keep him talking. They were quickly making a call themselves. When Brienne picked up, the first thing James asked her was what they had for dinner on the first night of their honeymoon. She was baffled by the question, but answered it anyway. It was James's way of making sure it was really her on the phone. He could not be too careful right now. James apologized for not picking up the phone earlier, but he was trying to keep a low profile, and the ringing of his phone or his talking into it would maybe have given him away. But now he was in a secure location where nobody would find him. James told Brienne that he knew that there were probably cops present with her and that he was willing to surrender, but only if he was promised a fair trial. He wanted his lawyer and a chance to prove his innocence. Brienne was overwhelmed. Who was she talking to right now? Brienne couldn't help but feel a bit relieved. Sure, she was deeply disturbed by the fact that her husband was considered a criminal, whereas she only knew him as a loving husband. She wanted to ask him about everything, but she knew that this was not the time and place to do that. She did not want James to have to answer a bunch of questions that might give the officers more information about the case and put him at a disadvantage in court. By now, it was obvious that they were going to end up there. So she only asked him one question. "Does that mean you're innocent?" James has no time to answer and quickly asked Brienne to pass the phone to the officer in charge. With only 2 officers to choose from, the decision was easily made. Little did she and James know that the officer was one step ahead of them already. You see, during Brienne's conversation with James, the officer had ordered to track down James's location based on the phone call. He still listened to what James had to say and tried to keep him on the line for as long as possible. Only then did it hit Brienne what he was doing. The moment the second officer gave the one on the phone a thumbs up, she knew that it was too late. The officer was now ready to end the call with James, but before he hung up the phone, Brienne snatched the phone out of his hand and screamed to let James know that they now knew his location and that he needed to run. The angry officer pushed Brienne away in response, causing her phone to fall to the ground. The children and Brienne's mother were also screaming now, but the officers did not seem to care. They were ready to put Brienne in handcuffs and arrest her for obstruction of justice. If James managed to escape because of her actions, there would be massive consequences for her. Brienne suddenly felt a pit in her stomach. She wasn't even sure what her husband had done or what he had been accused of, and now she was risking her own freedom for him. Unsure of what to do now and ready to surrender to the officer, Brienne was basically saved by the bell as they could all hear James screaming something through the phone. Brienne's mother nervously put the phone on speaker so that could all hear what James had to say. James said he wasn't going to run. He was taking his loss, as running was only going to make him more of a suspect. He'd rather drive home, so there would at least be a small chance that he could see his wife again. The officer agreed, but in reality, he had no intention of letting James return home. On his way to Brienne, James was quickly intercepted by officers who were tracking his location. But before they managed to put him in handcuffs, James called his wife again and begged her to get in contact with his lawyer. He needed his help to get out of this mess. Brienne proceeded to call James's lawyer. He listened to her story and told Brienne about the importance of proof. "Without proof, we don't stand a chance," he said. This gave Brienne hope that if her husband was innocent, they could get him out of this. But was he really innocent? Brienne understood that her only way to get proof was to go to the police station. She would have to try to speak to her husband, and only if they would let her do that, she'd be able to learn more. From now on, it would not take much longer until the truth started to unfold. But the police remained strict. They used their right to interrogate the suspect for the first 24 hours and told her only a lawyer was allowed to speak to James. Brienne remained hopeful and decided to call the lawyer, and she was right not to waste any time. The lawyer saw this coming, as it is the law. Brienne asked him to come down to the station and function as a sort of intermediary between her and James. The lawyer thought this was a good plan and agreed. In just 20 minutes, he was there. He entered the interrogation room, and Brienne waited. Brienne's nerves were killing her. It was very well possible that the fate of her family was going to be decided in there, and there was nothing she could do about it. She felt so helpless and wished she could help James. But then the lawyer came out. The lawyer first went into the bathroom and then quickly came to Brienne. He wanted to speak to her in her car so no one else could hear them. The lawyer walked so fast he was almost running. Brienne couldn't help but wonder, what had happened in that interrogation room? The lawyer explained how he barely had the chance to talk to James due to the presence of the police officers. James said he didn't trust them, even when they left the room. But there was also some hope. James had given the lawyer a piece of paper with an address on it. Brienne looked at the address. To her frustration, it didn't ring a bell. "Didn't he say anything else? He must have said something," she said to the lawyer. The lawyer didn't reply. Then, Brienne asked the lawyer whether he knew where to find the address. Brienne was onto something. Even though it took him some effort, the lawyer remained silent. Then, he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the right words for it. He was clearly struggling, and just as Brienne was about to put more pressure on him, he left the car and walked away. Brienne decided to drive down to the address and see for herself what she would find there. When she got there, she was smart enough not to get out of her car immediately. She drove around the area for a bit, and she saw a police car parked across from the address. Coincidence? Brienne didn't think so. Brienne decided to park the car at the end of the block. This way she could see the address as well as the police car. Now that she had the time to look at her destination, she saw that it was the address of a jewelry store. She decided to wait a bit longer until she entered it, which turned out to be the right call. But time passed and nothing happened. Was she wrong about the police car? Then, finally, the police officer left the jewelry store. She was relieved because while she was waiting, she had looked up the opening hours of the store. She had 30 minutes left. But then, she saw something odd happen. The jeweler left the store and formally waved goodbye to the police officer. But right after the police car disappeared around the corner, the jeweler ran back inside. Without hesitation, he slammed the door and turned off all the lights. Why in God's name did James give her this address? And what did it have to do with his innocence? Despite the negative outcome of Brienne's drive to the jewelry store, there was light at the end of the tunnel. The 24 hours of interrogation were almost over, which meant Brienne could talk to her husband soon. Now that the suspicious lawyer was out of the picture, the truth was about to reveal itself. Very early in the morning, Brienne entered the police station. She first had to identify and fill in some forms, and she was getting impatient. Finally, she got to see James. After her tears had dried up, she saw that the interrogation had taken its toll on James. She felt the urge to take care of him, but all this time, there was still only one question on her mind. She looked at her husband, but she was afraid of the possible outcome. Did she really want to know? She decided to take a leap of faith and asked, "Love, are you really innocent?" James looked her in the eyes. "Of course I am," he said. Brienne was happy to hear this, but also very critical of the possibility of proving his innocence. She countered by saying, "But why on earth didn't you give me something better than that note, with nothing but an address of a jewelry store?" James's answer would clear up a lot of things, but James didn't know what Brienne could possibly mean by this. "What note, love?" he asked. Then he explained to her how he didn't even have time to write a note. He had simply asked the lawyer to bring her a message. Brienne had to pick up his wedding ring. But why did James ask, out of all things, for his wedding ring? Brienne understood there was no time to waste. She rushed home to make sure she found the ring in time. After all, wasn't there a chance a certain someone else was going for it? Also, James's trial would start soon, so there was no time like the present to prove his innocence. Luckily, Brienne got there in time. She returns to the station with the ring. A little while later, poor James was released. The detective explained how her Instagram photo had been hacked and edited. After the edit, it appeared as if James was wearing an extremely valuable ring that had recently been reported stolen instead of his own wedding ring. He had been framed. The lawyer turned out to represent the actual thief. He had two agendas to take care of, and he chose the wrong one. James and Brienne filed a lawsuit against the lawyer, who would soon lose all his rights. That same night, Brienne had her little family back, and she couldn't be happier.